All right. Ready to dive deep into the Book of Kings. But hold on, we're not just skimming the surface here.
Right, we want to get to the heart of it, you know? What's this whole kingship thing really about?
We're talking political drama, divine showdowns.
And this big question looming over it all, did these kings, these rulers, actually live up to what God expected? Did they keep their end of the bargain?
That's a great question, because I think a lot of people, when they hear kings, they just think, oh, it's a list of names, who begat whom, and all these
It's
battles.
so much more than that. It's fascinating, really. Kings picks up where Samuel leaves off. We've got this unified Israel under King David, the guy who slew Goliath.
Yeah, the legendary David.
God promised him that a future king, a Messiah, would come from his line. But then the book throws us all these curveballs, these twists and turns.
Like a mystery novel, almost. Will God's promise, this huge promise, actually come true? Let's say it's messy, right?
It's messy. For starters, anyone who needs a quick refresher, 1 and 2 Kings, they were originally one book, right? One continuous story.
Right, right. It was just split up later.
Yeah.
But the way it's structured, that's important, I bet.
Absolutely. Imagine it like a play with 5 acts. Act 1 and 5, they both spotlight Jerusalem.
Okay, true.
Act 1, you've got Solomon building this glorious temple.
Solomon, David's son.
But then, boom, Act 5, the city is destroyed. The middle acts, that's where things get really interesting. They tell us how it all went wrong.
Okay, I'm seeing it now. Those middle acts are like the tragic backstory. They explain all the drama leading up to that final scene.
That's a great way to put it. So we start with Solomon. He inherits the kingdom from his dad, David. And David was like the gold standard for kings, right?
Yeah, the warrior, the poet, the man after God's own heart,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. You'd think with David's final words echoing all these past leaders, Moses, Joshua, Samuel, urging Solomon to be faithful to God, to follow the law, you'd think things would go smoothly.
Yeah, you'd think that'd set him up for success.
But nope. Right away, there's political maneuvering, even assassinations.
Hold on, whoa, time out. They're talking about being faithful, walking with God, but then they're plotting murders. Talk about mixed messages.
Right. It's like trouble was brewing from the very start. And then it gets even more complicated. On one hand, you've got Solomon asking God for wisdom. He builds this incredible temple.
Wait, back up. The temple? That was a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't that like the center of worship?
Oh, yeah. The temple was huge. It was this magnificent building all decked out with gold, jewels, these intricate carvings of angels and fruit trees.
Wow, sounds impressive.
It was meant to echo the Garden of Eden.
The Garden of Eden. Wow, so it's like a mini paradise on earth.
Precisely. It's the place where God's presence dwelt among his people.
So it seems like Solomon's doing pretty well so far. Wisdom, the temple.
Yeah, but this is where Solomon's wisdom seems to take a vacation. He goes and marries all these foreign wives.
Oh, I've heard about this.
Hundreds of them. And he starts adopting their gods, worshiping idols. He gets obsessed with wealth, uses slave labor to build his grand projects.
Okay, I'm seeing the downfall coming. He basically forgot everything his dad told him. And wait, didn't God give some guidelines for kings? Wasn't there something about that in Deuteronomy?
You got it. Deuteronomy chapter 17 lays it all out. God's instructions for kings. Don't accumulate too much wealth. Don't marry foreign wives who lead you astray. Don't go back to Egypt for horses.
And Solomon breaks all those rules.
It's like he just throws it all out the window. It's tragic, really. Solomon, who was meant to be this model king, ends up resembling Pharaoh more than his own father. And that sets the stage for, you guessed it, the kingdom splitting in two.
Oh man, I knew it was coming, but still, drama. Here we go. So Solomon dies and his son Rehoboam takes over. And he's not exactly winning any popularity contests, right?
Not really, no. He tries to raise taxes, and the northern tribes are like, no thanks, we're out.
They rebel.
They rebel. They choose this guy named Jeroboam to be their king, and they form their own kingdom called Israel.
So now there are two Israels.
Exactly. The south, with Jerusalem, stays loyal to David's line. They become the kingdom of Judah.
Two kingdoms, two kings.
Yeah.
Double the trouble, I bet.
You got it. And Jeroboam, to really cement his power in the north, does something that throws everything back to the Exodus story.
Wait, the Exodus. Are you talking about that golden calf incident?
Bingo. He sets up rival temples complete with golden calves. He's basically trying to create a new religion, a new way to worship.
Whoa, that's a bold move. And probably not going to end well. I mean, you can't just replace God, right?
It's a massive violation of the covenant, that agreement between God and his people. And that brings us to how the author of Kings judges these rulers. three big questions. Did they worship only the God of Israel?
Okay, that's number one.
Did they get rid of idolatry? No worshiping other gods allowed.
Got it.
And did they stay faithful to the covenant? Did they live by those terms, those promises?
All right, so those are the criteria. I'm guessing the report card isn't pretty.
Yeah, not so much. Out of 20 kings in the north, 0 get a passing grade. 0.
Ouch. That's rough. What about the south, Judah? Any good kings there?
A few, but not many. Only 8 out of 20. It's pretty dismal. This constant failure, this turning away from God, it's what leads to a huge E theme in Kings, the rise of the prophets.
Ah, the prophets. I knew they had to show up eventually.
Yeah.
They're the ones who always speak truth to power, right?
Yeah.
But they're not just fortune tellers, are they?
No, there's so much more than that. Think of them like covenant watchdogs, messengers speaking for God.
Okay, messengers, I like that.
They call out injustice. They remind everyone what they're supposed to be doing, what God expects of them, and they're not afraid to confront the kings, even when it's dangerous.
That takes some serious guts. So who are we talking about here? Give me some of the big names.
Well, there's Elijah, the ultimate wild man prophet. He goes head-to-head with King Ahab and Queen Jezebel in the north.
Elijah and Jezebel, that sounds familiar.
Oh yeah, that's a story for the ages.
Lay it on me. I'm ready for some drama.
Okay, so Ahab and Jezebel, they were all about worshiping this Canaanite god named Baal. Elijah's having none of it. He's like, nope, there's only one true God, and it's not Baal. So he challenges 450 prophets of Baal to a showdown on Mount Carmel.
Whoa, 450 versus 1. Those are some bad odds.
It's like a cosmic duel. Whose God is the real deal? They each build an altar, prepare a sacrifice, and then they pray to their gods to send fire.
This is intense. I'm on the edge of my seat. So
Yeah.
what happens?
The Baal prophets, they're yelling and chanting all day long, dancing around, even cutting themselves. Nothing happens. Silence.
Oh, man, that's got to be awkward.
Elijah steps up, soaks his altar with water just to make it extra difficult, and then he prays to the God of Israel, and boom, fire falls from the sky.
What? No way.
It consumes the sacrifice, the wood, even the stones of the altar. It's a total victory for Elijah and for the God of Israel. Mic drop moment.
That's one way to prove a point. Talk about a power move. But something tells me Ahab and Jezebel aren't going to take this lying down. They seem like the vengeful type.
You're right about that. Shortly after this epic showdown, Ahab does something truly awful. He uses his power to steal a vineyard from this poor farmer named Naboth. He even has Naboth murdered.
Are you serious? That's horrible. Talk about an abuse of power.
It shows you how far Ahab had fallen. He's totally lost his moral compass.
So what does Elijah do about this?
Yeah.
Does he just let it slide?
Nope. He confronts Ahab directly. He denounces his greed, his injustice.
Good for him.
He tells him straight up, judgment is coming. You and your family will pay for what you've done. It shows that the prophets weren't just about religious stuff, rituals and sacrifices.
He cared about justice, about protecting the vulnerable.
Exactly. They were fighting for what's right, even when it was dangerous.
Elijah's like a superhero fighting for the little guy.
Yeah.
But he can't do it forever, right? I mean, no one lives forever. What happens next?
Well, Elijah eventually passes the torch to his successor, Elisha. And get this, when it's time for Elijah to be taken up to heaven, Elisha asks for a double portion of Elijah's spirit.
Whoa, a double portion. Like double the power, double the miracles. How does that even work?
It's fascinating. Right? The author really highlights this. Elijah performs 7 miracles during his ministry. Elisha does 14.
Double. Exactly double.
It makes you think, is the world getting worse, needing more divine intervention? Or is it about God's power increasing in those who are faithful to him?
Okay, that's deep.
Yeah.
I need a minute to process that. But meanwhile, things are still pretty chaotic in the north, right? Lots of kings, lots of drama.
Oh, yeah, it's a revolving door of bad kings. And then this guy named Jehu comes along. He leads this bloody revolution. God actually tasks him with wiping out Ahab's family, getting rid of Baal worship, but things get out of control.
So even when God's involved, things can get messy.
That's right. Human nature has a way of twisting even the best intentions. This revolution creates this cycle of violence and instability in the north. They never really recover. Each king after Jehu just continues the pattern of bad choices, idol worship, injustice.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It is, and that disaster has a name. Assyria.
Uh-oh. That sounds ominous.
Assyria was this powerful empire, kind of like the bullies of the ancient world.
And they set their sights on Israel.
In 722 BC, the Assyrians conquer the northern kingdom, wiping out Samaria, their capital city. They scatter the Israelites all over their empire. The kingdom that started with so much promise is gone. Poof. It's a stark reminder that our choices have consequences. They echo through history.
Wow, that's heavy stuff. So with the north out of the picture, what happens to the south? What about Judah? Are they any better? Did they learn from Israel's mistakes?
Well, it's a mixed bag. We get some kings who try to follow God, like Hezekiah. When the Assyrians threaten Jerusalem, he puts his trust in God,
Good move.
and God delivers. It's a powerful story of faith and courage.
See, sometimes good things do happen.
They do, but then you have Hezekiah's son, Manasseh. He's considered the worst king ever.
The worst. Worse than Ahab. Worse than all those golden calf guys.
This guy's in a league of his own. Not only does he bring idols into the temple, he starts child sacrifice.
Whoa, hold on. That's taking it to a whole other level of bad.
Right.
Child sacrifice. Seriously.
It's horrific, right? It shows how deeply corrupted Judah had become. Even in a line chosen by God, you get individuals who completely turn away from him. It's a low point for the kingdom. And even though there's a brief revival under King Josiah, he finds this lost scroll of the Torah and tries to reform things, bring people back to God.
It doesn't last, does it?
Sadly, no. Josiah's reign is cut short. The kings who come after him, they go back to the same old patterns of disobedience, worshiping idols, ignoring the prophets.
It sounds like this is heading towards a repeat of the North's fate. Am I right?
You are. The last chapters of Kings tell the tragic story of the Babylonians invading Jerusalem, destroying the temple, taking the people, including the Davidic line, into exile. It's the climax of generations of bad choices. It's a fulfillment of those prophetic warnings.
So both kingdoms are gone. God's people are scattered. Is there any hope left at all? This is bleak.
It's definitely a dark time. But even in the midst of all this devastation, the book ends with a tiny glimmer of hope.
Okay, tell me more. I need some good news.
The very last part of Kings, fast forwards about 40 years into the exile, it mentions this guy, Jehoiachin. He's descendant of David, someone who should have been king. He's been a prisoner in Babylon all these years. But then the king releases him.
He releases him. Just like that.
And not only that, he gives Jehoiachin a place of honor at his table.
Wait, that's unexpected. What's the significance of that?
It's a hint, a whisper that God hasn't forgotten his promises. Even though the kingdoms are gone, the Davidic line seemingly shattered, there's this tiny seed of hope, a suggestion of restoration.
Okay, so it's not a happy ending, but maybe it's not the end. Like there's still a chance things could turn around.
Exactly. The Book of Kings leaves us with some big questions. What will happen to the exiles? How will God fulfill his promises? And how does the Messiah fit into all of this?
Okay, that's a bit of a cliffhanger. So we've got this mix of uncertainty, but also this tiny sliver of hope.
That's the beauty of the Bible. It's not always neat and tidy. It reflects the complexities of life, the ups and downs, the struggles and triumphs, and it invites us to wrestle with those big questions, to keep searching for answers.
This is already blowing my mind. We've gone from Solomon's wisdom to utter chaos, political intrigue, divine showdowns. I can't wait to see where this goes next.
So we left off with the southern kingdom, Judah, hauled off to exile in Babylon. It's a pretty bleak picture, I know. But like we talked about, there are these threads of hope woven throughout Kings.
Yeah, those little hints that God's not done yet. Like maybe things aren't as hopeless as they seem.
Right. And one of those threads we can't ignore, it's the persistence of the prophets. They're like these recurring characters who keep popping up.
You're telling me those guys didn't give up even when everyone was ignoring them? I mean, talk about a tough dig.
Nope, they never stopped calling people back to God, even when their message was met with resistance, which, let's face it, was most of the time.
That's some serious dedication. Speaking truth to power, no matter the cost. We talked about Elijah, Elisha. Those guys were intense. But there were a bunch of other prophets and kings too, right?
Oh yeah, tons. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, Amos.
Whoa, those are some big names.
Each one had their own style, their own way of delivering God's message, but they were all about bringing people back to the covenant, back to that agreement between God and his people.
And warning them about what happens if they stray from it.
Right. They laid out the consequences pretty clearly. If you keep going down this road, they said, things are not going to end well. But it's important to remember, they weren't all doom and gloom.
Yeah, there's got to be some hope in there somewhere, right?
Absolutely. They also pointed toward a future where God would restore his people, bring them back to the land he promised them, establish a new covenant, this time written not on stone tablets,
But on their hearts. I think I've heard that somewhere before.
Exactly. It's this beautiful image of transformation, of God working from the inside out.
So it's a mix of tough love and hope.
You got it. It's what makes the Book of Kings so interesting, so real. It's not a simple story of good guys and bad guys. It's about human nature, the consequences of our choices, and God's constant faithfulness.
Yeah, that faithfulness shines through even in the darkest moments. So we've got these kings, the prophets, the divided kingdom, the exile. Anything else we should be paying attention to as we read Kings? Like, are there any big themes, any patterns that connect all these different parts?
Great question. One of the most important themes is covenant faithfulness. Throughout the book, you see this stark contrast
Between what?
between kings who honor the covenant, who keep their promises to God, and those who don't.
And how those choices play out.
Exactly. If they followed God's laws, if they treated people justly, if they put God first, things generally went well.
But if they turned away, if they worshipped other gods, if they let greed and power corrupt them.
Then things fell apart. It shows that true leadership, the kind that matters to God, it's not about power or fame. It's about obedience. It's about faithfulness.
That's something every leader, even today, could learn from.
Absolutely. And think about it this way. We all make covenants in our lives, right? Whether it's marriage vows, promises to friends and family, commitments we make at work or in our communities, our faithfulness or lack of it impacts not just us, but everyone around us.
That's a good point. It's like a ripple effect.
Hmm.
So, covenant faithfulness, that's a big one. What else? What other themes should we have on our radar?
Idolatry. That's a huge EE one.
Yeah, we've seen plenty of that already. Golden calves, anyone.
Kings shows how worshiping other gods, putting anything before God, leads to all sorts of problems.
Problems like what?
Corruption, injustice, violence, you name it. It's like a poison that spreads through everything, weakening the nation from the inside out. And eventually, it led to the downfall of both Israel and Judah.
It's like they traded the true God for a bunch of cheap knockoffs and ended up paying the price.
Exactly. And remember, idolatry isn't just about bowing down to statues, it's anything we put in God's place. Wealth, power, success, even good things like family or relationships.
It's about misplaced priorities. Letting things other than God take center stage in our lives. Which, let's be honest, is something we're all tempted to do.
It's a constant battle, isn't it? But Kings challenges us to look inward, to examine our hearts, and make sure we're putting God first in all things.
So we've got covenant faithfulness, idolatry, anything else.
Keep an eye on how the book portrays God's justice and mercy, because it's not a one-dimensional picture. On one hand, you see judgment poured out on Israel and Judah for their sin, for their idolatry.
Yeah, the consequences are pretty clear.
But there's another side to it, too. Even when he's bringing judgment, God never completely abandons his people. He sends prophets time and time again to call them back to him. He shows compassion to those who repent.
So it's about holding people accountable while still offering them a way back.
Exactly. That balance of justice and mercy, it's what makes the Book of Kings so relevant to us today. It reminds us that God is both holy and loving. He demands justice, but he also offers forgiveness and restoration to those who seek him.
That's a message we all need to hear. As we wrap up this part of our deep dive into Kings, what are some key takeaways you hope we're walking away with?
First, remember the importance of covenant faithfulness. Honoring our commitments, keeping our promises to God and to each other, it matters.
Because our choices have consequences.
Absolutely. Our choices impact not just us, but everyone around us. Second, I hope this deep dive encourages you to do some soul searching.
Soul searching.
Yeah, to examine your heart for idols, for anything you might be putting before God. Because idolatry, it's sneaky, it can creep in without us even realizing it, but it always leads us away from true life, away from true joy.
It's like we end up chasing shadows instead of the real thing.
That's a great way to put it. And finally, remember that God's justice and mercy are always intertwined. Even when his people messed up big time, he never gave up on them. He disciplines us because he loves us, and he always offers a way back. His grace is there for anyone who repents and turns to him.
That's seriously good news. This has been an amazing deep dive so far. We've uncovered some big themes, wrestled with some tough questions, but there's still more to explore. Let's jump into the final part of our King's Deep Dive and see where it all leads. Okay, so we're in the home stretch of our King's Deep Dive, right? We've journeyed through political chaos, we've seen those prophetic showdowns.
And those devastating consequences when the kings broke that covenant with God.
So where does it all lead? How does this ancient story connect to the bigger picture? Like, why does this even matter for us today?
That's the million-dollar question. Kings might seem like this standalone story, but it's really a crucial chapter in God's grand narrative, his plan for all of humanity.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Help me connect the dots. So Kings ends with Judah, the southern kingdom, hauled off to exile in Babylon. Their whole world's been turned upside down. But we talked about those glimmers of hope, right? Those little hints that God's not finished yet.
Exactly. Remember Jehoiachin, that descendant of David who gets released from prison in Babylon, and not only released, but honored by the Babylonian king.
Yeah, there was a surprise. It felt like a ray of light in all that darkness.
It's a clue. It's like one of those breadcrumbs in a fairy tale leading us forward. To really understand what happens next, we need to turn to the prophets who are writing during and after the exile. Guys like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel.
So the prophets pick up the torch, so to speak. They offer a vision of what's to come. What does a future with God look like after all this mess?
That's it. They talk about this future day when God will gather his scattered people,
Bring them back home.
bring them back to their land. He'll establish a new covenant, this time written not on stone tablets.
But on their hearts. Yeah, I've heard that before.
It's powerful, isn't it? It's this beautiful image of transformation, of God working from the inside out.
It's like a cosmic reset button. A chance to start fresh, but this time, get things right. Do it God's way.
I like that. A cosmic reset and all these prophetic visions, they're pointing towards the arrival of the Messiah.
The Messiah, the one who would, set everything right.
The ultimate fulfillment of that promise God made to David way back when.
Whoa, it's all coming together. You said at the beginning that Kings is really about whether those kings lived up to the expectation of a Messianic king, right? One who would be the perfect ruler, God's chosen one.
And did they?
Nope, not even close. They were too busy messing things up with their bad choices.
So the Book of Kings, it sets us up for this big question. If the kings failed, if those kingdoms crumbled, how does God fulfill his promise?
Where does a Messiah fit in? How does God bring redemption out of all this chaos?
Precisely. And that question, it echoes through the rest of the Old Testament. It's this story of God's faithfulness, even when his people wander far from him. And then in the New Testament, we see those promises burst onto the scene in the person of Jesus Christ.
Okay, mind officially blown. So Kings isn't just ancient history. It's a vital part of this much bigger story, this story that leads to Jesus.
You got it. That's why Kings is so important in the Bible. It lays the groundwork for understanding who Jesus is and why we need him so desperately.
We see our need for a savior, right? Because let's face it, we're all messed up like those kings sometimes.
We are, but it also shows us God's unwavering commitment to keeping his promises, no matter what.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on Kings and how it connects to the rest of the Bible. It's not just a bunch of random stories. It's all connected.
It's amazing, isn't it, how one book can unlock so much understanding about God, about ourselves, about the whole sweep of history.
It really is. So, as we wrap up this epic King's adventure, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember? What's the big takeaway?
I want them to remember hope, even when things seem hopeless. Even when human leaders fail spectacularly, like we saw with those kings, God is still at work. His plans are bigger than any king, any nation, any empire. He will keep his promises, and he will bring about his kingdom, this kingdom of justice, of peace, of righteousness, no matter what.
That's a message we all need to hear. Thank you so much for taking us on this journey, for guiding us through the Book of Kings. It's been incredible.
My pleasure. It's always a joy to explore the depths of Scripture and see what treasures we can uncover.
Well, deep divers, that concludes our exploration of the Book of Kings. I hope you've enjoyed the journey as much as we have. But the adventure doesn't end here. Keep diving into the Bible, keep asking those tough questions, and keep discovering for yourself this amazing story of God's love and faithfulness that unfolds from Genesis to Revelation. Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.